Elie Mystal, who was speaking to Joy Reid, Tommy. Elie Mystal is a frequent guest on MSNBC. He is a law professor, I believe, at least formerly, at an Ivy League college. The point is, not just some random radical given a microphone, but somebody who has participated in shaping young minds. And here's what he had to say as we approach the July 4th holiday. Here's what he had to say about America.
I don't say this lightly, but our country needs to be sanctioned. We are the bad guys on the world stage. We are a menace to not only free people everywhere, but we are a menace to peaceful people everywhere at this point. And I'm not even going to say that we've only been a menace for the past 3 or 4 months, right? Like, when does the international community decide that enough is enough? I know we're rich. I know we've got a lot of money. I know that people want to buy things from our country because we're rich, or want to sell things to our country because we're rich. But at some point, the international community has to stand up to us because we are a bad guy on the world stage, right? And so we should be sanctioned.
We are the bad guy on the world stage, and we should be sanctioned. We, America, Tommy.
Will, why is he here? I mean, that would be, I guess, my overarching question. He hates this country. It's racist. It's oppressive. It's a bad actor on the world stage. It's the international community should sanction us. Why doesn't he go become a part of the wider international community? It's funny. All of these people that hate America refuse to leave America. It's very simple. If this country is so bad, leave it, right? I obviously give California a lot of crap. I left California. If I were still sitting in California dumping on California, I would be a hypocrite. I left California, right? But these people, they dump on the entire country. There's not a single place in this country, even the places that vote for democratic socialists, not even those places are acceptable to people like that. But, Will, I think they say these things because they got to get attention. Because if he were sounding even mildly sane, no one would be paying attention. You wouldn't be playing a clip of him. Same thing with Joy Reid, who called Alligator Alcatraz a concentration camp for brown people. They have to say these things because while they might get a certain spot or soundbite here and there on MSNBC, by and large, they just rely on podcasting or digital, which you and I both love, but they have to say crazy things in order to be talked about. I think that's more what this is about. Also, they hate America, but probably more so for attention.
Okay, I think that's interesting. I think you're probably right. We live in an attention economy, and the attention economy requires people to do outlandish things in order to get attention. However, I do think, at least to some extent, he believes what he says. Now, the question is whether or not he's a hypocrite or he's truly a fraud, because if he believed what he said, to your point, he would leave America. If it is so bad, you would find someplace that isn't so bad to lay your head at night. But I do think there is this general antipathy towards Western civilization. And I don't want to limit it to America because you'll hear and see similar things across Europe. And I do find it fascinating that no one chooses to leave Western civilization. In fact, I always love the thought experiment that if you took down all international borders and allowed people to freely move where they would like, where do you see a net influx? Where do you see a net outflow? And it's obviously true, it's happening, that you see a net inflow in Europe. People from the Middle East and from Africa are moving to France and to Germany. And of course, people from all over the world try to get into the United States, which speaks for itself when you say, why would everyone flock to something that is so bad? So they end up sounding like, and maybe this is what they truly are, this is the stereotype, the wife who says she loves her husband wants to change everything about him. At some point, do you love your husband? And I think it's a worthy question to them. Why are you here? Do you just want to change everything about America? Do you not have any place else on earth that lives out your fantasies, that you wouldn't have to struggle so hard to change? That is your vision of utopia, or even just better than this awful place that is the bad guy, America?
I'd also point out that the few celebrities that actually have left America, as they've promised to do, you got your Ellen DeGeneres, your Rosie, and maybe a couple others. Not many actually follow through. But where do they go, Will? Are they going to Africa? Are they going to the Middle East? No, they sure are not. They're going to Europe. They're going to Europe. They're going to Ireland. They're going to the UK. They're going to, of course, Western civilization. So even when they flee here, they go to maybe the second best option. And then they still complain about the U.S. when they're there. So it's obvious to me that they don't actually believe this country is horrible. They don't actually believe that European countries are horrible. But still, they want us to be more like the third world here. So it's almost like they leave it or they hate it, but they want it to look completely different, but not for the better, for the worse. It's like, let's just destroy it. And I think that's the same thing with Mamdani. I don't think he actually thinks that socialism and communism is going to make New York City better. I think he knows it'll destroy New York City, and I think that's the point. I think some of these people truly hate this country, and they want to see it fail. And maybe that's the bigger problem.
Zohran Mamdani, the current Democratic candidate for mayor in New York City, who's becoming the new flag bearer for the left, becoming the new flag bearer, in fact, for a political party, Democrats. Okay, let's keep going with this new research that came out, Tomi. It's not surprising in that we've started to see this trend over a period of months and years. But over the past month, we've seen this particular poll come out. We'll flash it up on the screen that shows the divide between genders, between men and women. And this shows South Korea, the United States, Germany, and the UK, and their political leanings. The title is "A Wide Ideology Gap is Opening Up Between Young Men and Women in Countries Across the World." Now, in the United States, young men have gained significantly, going from plus 20 to the right to plus 40 to the right. Meanwhile, young women have dropped from plus 10 to 0 between right and left. So about a 40-point gap between men and women in the United States. Less pronounced in Germany, but still a divide. German women, young women, something like plus 2, 3, 4, 5 for the left. Young men plus close to 30 to the right. In the UK, both seem to lean towards the right, but there is about a 20-point gap between young men and young women. And just for curiosity, it's flipped totally in South Korea. Young women plus 20 to the right, young men off the charts, like 40 to the left. There's a lot to dig into there about what's happening between young men and young women, the least of which, by the way, because it's furthest away from home, is what is happening in South Korea. But the rest of the Western world, you see this huge divide between young men and young women.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts as to why that is, but I think that the easiest one to point to and discuss is our education system, and specifically higher education. You see women, which is great, going to college, sometimes surpassing men with their attendance and their completion of college, at least in the last 10 years, and that's great, right? But when you look at the institutions that they're going to, especially if they are the Ivy League, especially if they're in the Northeast or in California, they're teaching these people to hate America. They're teaching these people to hate patriotism and all the conservative ideals. So it really doesn't surprise me that you see a lot of young women trending more towards the left. Where did they go to school? I think that has a lot to do with it because these institutions are pumping out activists, and a lot of them tend to be white liberal women activists or white liberal men who think they're women. Same thing, I guess. And I think that that's a big part of this cultural trend.
Well, you and I don't know that either of us have the answer, but we need to figure out what's happening in South Korea because it's the exact opposite. How are young women ending up more conservative and young men incredibly liberal? Okay, I want to see what you think about this. I think it's self-evidently true. You defy, really honestly, the odds on this because as long as I've known you and known of you, you've been conservative. But I think a real shift happens with women often when they get married. We see that they move from less liberal to more conservative through the institution of marriage. But as I mentioned, you were openly conservative before that stage of your life. So what I wonder is, as you point out, it is like the college-educated white liberal woman becomes the ideological North Pole, or North Star for the left. And I think it's interesting as to why, Tomi. And I think you point to indoctrination in education. I also think, I think there are gender roles that are important in a relationship and in a society. And men sometimes tend to be hyper-rational, hyper-logical, less empathetic. Women see things often more through the lens of empathy. And society needs both, by the way. You have to have both because, and we're speaking in generalities here, men can sometimes not offer up easily empathy or see themselves in someone else's situation. But if empathy is your true guiding light in every scenario, you're incoherent, right? It's just whatever feels good, whatever is nice. Unintended consequences, long-term effects are ignored. Cohesive thoughts smashed together in incoherence. So I think part of it is just simply the way we see the world, and women hyper-index here with empathy, which pulls them hard to the left.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of thoughts on this that we probably don't have time to get into, but for me, the way that I look at this and the way that I approach this is by actually talking to women who consider themselves to be liberal. I know that's like a crazy thought. Like, let's ask the liberal women why they're liberal. And I'm not necessarily out there talking to the very, very liberal ones that are, the Queers for Palestine or, the Eat the Rich or the, abortion is healthcare. I'm not talking about those liberal women. I'm talking about liberal women that I know and consider friends. And I ask them maybe why they consider themselves a Democrat or a liberal. And what I hear most often is that they actually have fiscal conservative principles. And they love their country, and they want a secure border. I'll tell you what turns them off. And this is me saying it on behalf of them and what they've told me. It's that they feel like to be considered a conservative, at least in today's construct or what they're hearing, is that to be conservative, you have to be a trad wife that thinks that your main role is being a wife and mother, okay? They also think that you have to be very, very, very pro-life, and that beyond that, you probably don't believe in, gay marriage or same-sex marriage, and that's what turns them away from being a conservative. And they are conservative fiscally because they believe in capitalism. They also believe in the other tenets of conservatism as laid out by the MAGA movement, secure borders, national security, all those things. But it's some of the social issues where they are not really, really far to the right on that makes them think that they're actually on the left, but they're really not. So maybe it's a messaging issue. I tend to think maybe it is.
Well, I think that's really interesting, and you just gave us firsthand account, and I believe all that to be true. Like, not just because I trust you, but I have seen and heard that same type of thing. But here's what's interesting. Take that back to the thing I said about marriage. Donald Trump did very well with women in the last election, and so that packaging and that messaging that is hitting home with your friends who are liberal. And by the way, I share your perspective on life. I have friends, not all of whom share my political opinions. I enjoy the conversation. I like understanding. This is why I invite a James Carville or a Ned Price onto the Will Cain Show, which we'll be talking about here in just a moment and how that went yesterday. I like trying to understand in the same way I want to understand what's happening in South Korea. I want to understand how people end up where they are. But marriage change, I have two thoughts on what you laid out while accepting that it's true. I think marriage flips a lot of that. So what you describe is often what we hear from single women. The second thing is that person you described, let's take gender out of it, the fiscally conservative, somewhat socially liberal person is often in the quote-unquote libertarian mold, right? There's a lot of people that say they are fiscally conservative and socially liberal, and then they go, well, I guess I'm a libertarian. I saw this graph, and I'm not going to be able to quote where it came from, Tomi, but I just saw it in the last 2 days, and it showed quadrants of where people are fiscally and socially, and it plots the entire sort of political dynamic. And the left, by the way, is super down in the corner of, super liberal, and they say they want, I believe, fiscal, I can't remember if it's fiscal control. The right is more moderate, actually, despite all the public packaging on this, but it is conservative on social issues. But my point is that quadrant that we often think everybody says how they describe themselves, socially liberal, fiscally conservative, is fairly empty. There's not actually many people who vote and behave and live their lives in that way, even though they say it's what reflects how they think or feel. And I promise you, at 4th of July this weekend, you and I, whoever we're going to hear, you're going to encounter that, right? Always you do. I'm fiscally conservative, but I'm kind of socially liberal. But are you really? Because I don't know that that's
socially
playing
liberal
out.
or socially moderate. So I think there's a big difference between being socially liberal and socially moderate. I think that the social moderates are actually where most people in this country live. They are totally fine with gay marriage. They don't care. They believe in the women's right to choose, but to a point, and they believe it should be safe, legal, rare, and they're not celebrating abortion, and they definitely don't believe in late-term abortion, but they believe that that option should be there. So those people, I think, actually comprise most people in this country, and the data shows us that. So they're not socially liberal. They don't believe in late-term abortions, and they don't believe in transing children, LGBTQIA, everything. They're socially moderate. And I think there's a myth that you're either socially liberal or you're socially conservative. Most people are in the middle there.
Yeah.
So I think that's why the data that you mentioned doesn't reflect those people, because they are in a moderate place.
All right, I think that's really good. I always have trouble with these words like moderate and these kind of things, because it's like moderate requires that you accept two extremes or two poles, right? If it were a line graph, moderate would always be in the middle, and what defines that. But regardless, I think you are accurately describing most people. And by the way, Two-A-Days Dan pulled up that chart really quickly, Tommy. I don't know if you have return, but this is what I did come across. The source is Lee Drutman, New America by the New York Times. This was in the New York Times. So, okay, it's a graph. At the bottom left-hand corner would be most socially liberal, more fiscally liberal. So they consider themselves fiscally liberal. I guess that would be command and control, fiscally liberal. More fiscally conservative, that'd be a freer economy, is to the right. You can see, Tommy, it's empty. The vertical line is social issues in terms of more conservative or not. So you see what I'm saying, where the blue dots in the left are super far to the corner on socially liberal, fiscally liberal. That's that word, I hate that, fiscally liberal, because it sounds like free, but it's not. It's command and control. Where the right plot graph is high on social conservatism and actually not that far on fiscally conservative. It's very moderate. It leans a little to the right on that. So that's what I'm referencing there, Tommy.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I would also say, though, that part of the problem, the liberals got a lot of problems, right? The Democrats got a lot of problems. I could sit here and we could talk about it and we'd agree on a lot of them. If I'm actually sitting here, though, from my perspective as a millennial conservative, and I were diagnosing maybe some of the hurdles that the conservative movement is going to have to tackle in the next 5 years, I would say reaching out to the social moderates is probably one of them. And President Trump is the best example of that, because President Trump, unlike a lot of Republican candidates that we've had in the last 20 years, he is not necessarily socially conservative. Yes, he talked about abortion, but he didn't really want to, by the way. He was kind of dragged into that conversation. He didn't talk out and say anything about marriage should be between a man and a woman. No, he didn't. To my knowledge, he never has. So he was a complete game changer when it came to capturing social moderates, fiscal conservatives. That, to me, is the mega movement. It is not focused on social issues. It's focused on the border and national security and capitalism and the economy, and that is where the conservative movement should go. But unfortunately, some people think the conservative movement is more of a Mike Pence. Well, how much do conservatives really like Mike Pence right now? Right. Not much.
I think the big takeaway for me on that graph is that nobody comes in the quadrant of what we talked about: fiscally conservative, socially liberal, the self-described everyman libertarian. Really quickly, I want to go over to the comments, Tommy. What some folks are saying over here. Justin Fitch says, to dismiss the notion that the United States isn't a villain is to dismiss U.S. foreign policy for the past several decades. You know, I totally reject this concept. It's not that we're always right, but there is a strain of thought, certainly on the left and increasingly on the quote-unquote new right, that we're a bad guy. I don't believe in good guys and bad guys. I believe that countries act in their own self-interest. Vladimir Putin acts in his own self-interest. It's not a moral equation for him, right? You can say he's immoral. That's fine, and I may agree with you. But stop thinking of the simplistic terms of good guy and bad guy. Same thing with Iran, for that matter. And the United States should behave by the same token. we should be asking ourselves, is it serve our interests? What's the point in a nation state otherwise to elect representatives that serve our interest, a.k.a., by the way, America first? Mike Bailey says, no, Democrats are villains, okay? And through hell and back says, all the people who hate America can leave. USA, USA. Wendell Williams says, Madummy, wake-up call for New York. I think that's a reference to Mom Donnie. Mad Dummy instead of Mom Dummy. Okay, there's one other thing here, Tommy. On this liberal-conservative thing, there is I think, a non-unfounded fear among conservatives right now that social liberalism, when embraced, and you're right, by the way, I think gay marriage probably has pretty high approval rating, even on the right, but that we entered at that stage the slippery slope of insanity, and it didn't have a break on that train, and it ended up with, for example, Will Thomas swimming at the University of Pennsylvania and smoking women. Now, is that a straight through line? Are there not stop signs on that road? Of course there are. But society didn't seem to see any for about it only took 7 years or so, 7 or 8 years. And now the University of Pennsylvania has wiped Leah Thomas's records from the book, reinstated the rightful record holders, the females at the University of Pennsylvania, and it's at least a half-hearted partial win. It's great for those girls, and I took time yesterday to put their names and pictures up on the show because they should be celebrated. They missed their day in the sun. But you can see what I'm getting at here. It's like we ran fast as a society, and I think we can unwind some of it. We can hit the brakes. I hope we can hit reverse on some of this insanity.
Yeah, I think it was a big correction in 24. We also have to remember a lot of this came to be in 2020, okay, when people were stupid. Probably the dumbest we've ever been. We allowed the government to close businesses, lock healthy people in their homes, close down gyms, but you could order Uber Eats until you were 350 pounds. 2020 was a stupid year. People were posting black squares to end racism. Okay, this was a dumb year. So when all of this woke stuff happened, it was in 2020. So I don't believe that it's because we legalized gay marriage that we got to Leah Thomas and all of this. I think it was 2020 and woke insanity that brought us there. And then 2024 was a giant correction of that. So I think if we stay on track and we stay normal and sane, I don't think we're going to go back there. I don't think they can pull us back there. I think that we're going to probably, there will be some left turns here and there, but I think, by and large, the American people are back on track from where we were in 2020.